Hello there, wherever you are. I was interested this week to learn about something called Diana's tree, which is something that you see in chemical reactions, and the metal inside this reaction takes the shape of a tree. Isaac Newton and various other esotericists and alchemists used this tree to demonstrate that even at the level of metals and minerals there is life of a certain kind. Even the spirit of growing into a tree is present in minerals and metals. And Gurdjieff, of course, had a very interesting diagram showing the different levels of being that exist throughout the world, and that at its widest extent one man may be as different from another as an animal is to a mineral. And I've taken a section from Views from the Real World by Gurdjieff, which I'll read out now. He says, "Man is a product of the interaction of three kinds of matter: positive, the atmosphere of the earth; negative, minerals and metals; and a third combination of planetary influences which comes from outside and meets these two matters. This neutralizing force is the planetary influence which colors each newly born life. This coloring remains for the whole of its existence. If the color was red, then when this life meets with red, it feels in correspondence with it." Of course, he's talking about your birth chart, as they say in astrology. But here we have the why and the how of it, not just the what that they have in astrology. He says, "Certain combinations of colours have a calming effect, others a disturbing effect. Each colour has its own peculiar property. There is a law in all of this. It depends on chemical differences. There are, so to speak, congenial and uncongenial combinations. For instance, red stimulates anger, blue awakens love, pugnacity corresponds to yellow. Thus, if I am apt to lose my temper suddenly, this is due to the influence of the planets. It does not mean that you or I are actually like that, but there may be stronger influences. Sometimes another influence acts from within you and prevents you from feeling the external influence. You may have such a strong preoccupation that you are, as it were, encased in armor. And this is so not only with planetary influences. Often a distant influence cannot reach you. The more remote the influence, the weaker it is, and even if it were specially sent to you, it might not reach you because your armor would prevent it." This is one thing in relation to self-study and self-observation. The fact is that there can be a lot of different influences. There can be a lot of things occurring at the same time. For instance, if you're studying the Heptaparparshinok, there may be lateral octaves, there may be items that come from different octaves and from different processes, and so the study needs to have a lot of care and, of course, dealing with the simplest thing and things that are close to you that you can be more sure about. And when you get the key and you can taste it inside, then once again you can go out into the world and see more clearly. He continues, "The more developed a man is, the more he is subject to influences. Sometimes wishing to be free from ourselves, we get free of one and fall under many others, and so become even less free, even more slaves. We have spoken of 9 influences. Always everything influences us. Every thought, feeling, movement is a result of one or another influence. Everything we do, all our manifestations are what they are because something influences us from without. Sometimes this slavery humiliates us, sometimes not. It depends on what we like. We are also under many influences which we share in common with animals. We may want to get free from 1 or 2, but having got free of them, we may acquire another 10. On the other hand, we do have some choice. That is, we can keep some and free ourselves of others. Well, all this is rather complicated if you ask me, and you've got to remember that Gurdjieff was learning on his own and came from a sort of magical background. He was a working man, whereas in my opinion the systematic way it is dealt with in the 5 elements puts a lot of structure into it. And for instance, earlier Gurdjieff was talking about the meaning of colours, yellow, blue and red. Well, those feelings that he described are described differently in the 5 elements. For instance, anger is more carefully defined as the negative part of the spring element. When you're pushing in the spring, you push outwards and you're blocked, that creates anger. And that's why anger is green. But often in Western culture, anger is thought of as being red, whereas in the 5 elements in China, the negative part of red is hatred. And in my opinion, having studied these for a long time, the 5 elements takes great care and knows what it's talking about. And actually, for instance, in the West you can say you're green with envy. These colorings are quite imprecise, if you ask me, in the West. And if I just round off this section in Views from the Real World, and it does go on quite a lot, it seemed to me that Gurdjieff was trying to play these influences off against each other and to struggle a bit too much and not systematically. Ultimately, I'm getting older now. I do feel a bit tired and I wish to rest in the love of God and come to a final conclusion about things, a final unification and integration. Another section that came up is from In Search of the Miraculous with Ouspensky. It goes like this. Ouspensky says, I had thanked him for the consideration he had given me and for his explanations, which I already saw had changed many things for me. But all the same, you know, the most important thing is facts, I said. If I could see genuine and real facts of a new and unknown character, only they would finally convince me that I am on the right way. I was again thinking of miracles. There will be facts, said G. I promise you. But many other things are necessary first. I did not understand his last words then. I only understood them later when I really came up against facts, for G kept his word. But this was not until about 1.5 years later in August 1916. Of the last talks in Moscow there is still another which remains in my memory, during which G said several things which again became intelligible only subsequently. He was talking about a man I had met while with him, and he spoke of his relations with certain people. He is a weak man, said G. People take advantage of him, unconsciously of course, and all because he considers them. If he did not consider them, everything would be different, and they themselves would be different. It seemed odd to me that a man should not consider others. What do you mean by this word consider? I asked. I both understand you and do not understand you. This word has a great many different meanings. Precisely the contrary, said G. There is only one meaning. Try to think about this. What do I think about that? Well, I think people consider each other because they live in a state of fear. They live in a state of fear because they do not feel themselves and they cannot really act from their center. And moreover, with all the many eyes and the different complications that they actually have inside, it is difficult for them to really represent themselves, because we are creatures with a lot of work to do. We would seem to be transitional creatures, leaving the kingdom of animals and trying to get to a higher world, and there is debris all around us, debris from our past and hope for the future. We have to be brave, as our ancestors have been before us. In that earlier section in Views, something that I did not read, but that is related to this question of being a slave to others, Gurdjieff says that if you treat yourself in a certain way, other people take that as a cue, and then they treat you like that as well. So if you have an interest in yourself, if you enjoy being yourself, then other people enter into that river of interest. But if you have a problem with yourself, then other people take your lead. That was in the continuing section that I didn't read out. I've got a couple of images that came to me. One was in relation to plumbing. An old friend of mine came in to do some plumbing in my 120-year-old Victorian flat, and it was not an open and shut case. And I was talking to him about his analysis, and I thought it was quite interesting, because there were three distinct sources of knowledge that he was using to fix the problem. The first was he made some calculations based upon pressure drop on the meter, and he isolated parts of the system, and he wrote that down, a direct intellectual function. The second thing is, because he is an obivatal kind of man who can deal with different kinds of situations, newer systems, older systems, he can take things apart and put them together from the ground up. He is that kind of guy. And in his gut, he has an instinct, a learned power, which is the result of your being particle duty, and it is an intelligence that is inside the middle story. And the third experience, he related to me that he had had some experiences with different people and he always remembered them. That did not seem very good to me. It was like he had some bad experiences and they hung around. That seems to come from the many eyes, and they can pester us, and they can colour what we see. And that is a third part, which, although it can be at a higher level, it is partial, because the many eyes represent a fragmentation of a power, a fragmentation of the third story. Fragmented because it has not evolved to be one yet. So there we have three different streams of understanding that have to be triangulated into your activity in life. The first, if I start at the bottom, the first is the obivatal intelligence coming from the solar plexus, which is based on your previous work and knowledge and accrued. That is rather effortless, like a gut instinct is effortless. Then the second is part of the newer functions of the intellect. Calculation, it's a bit tiring, but it does yield good results. It's tiring because it's a new function. And the third relates to the shared material we have with other people, and which is our evolutionary material that we're gradually integrating with the rest of the being, and will one day be a fully reconciled third story, if we make it. So, three streams of intelligence. So the unreliable parts are the many eyes, because they are fragmented and they are still learning, although they do have quite a high level of power. The solar plexus should be the most reliable and the most stable and instinctive, of course only in somebody who has done their being part double duty. Now the second image I had is in relation to work with negative emotions. I wanted to look at it in a multi-dimensional way because there are several different types of work that can be done in relation to negative emotions. We see here this lady who is looking at a negative emotion. By looking at it, she separates from it, and so she learns how to separate. That's work one. The second part is she's actually strengthening the part of her mind that is observing it. And there is also a kind of more passive version of that, which is witnessing, which comes from the back of the head. Observing is at the front, witnessing is settled in the back, in more like gazing out through the front. But these are two kinds of powers. These are two relatively stable positions that you can develop. And by strengthening those elements inside you, the negativity will bother you less. However, it doesn't actually treat the negativity at all. Now, you hear many people saying that you shouldn't be negative, or if you're negative, you should stop being negative. This doesn't work. This doesn't work because you're not really doing anything with the negativity. You're not returning it to its source. You're not purifying it. The more advanced work you can do is once you are able to separate from your negativity so you're not dragged into it, and you have a strengthened observing power, then what you can do is learn about the negativity. Feel what it is, sadness, depression. Feel it, weigh it in your heart, and then you can heal it. It's like you open your emotional energy to hold that shadow. You hold it in your love. So you begin with this separation and then observation. But the further work, the work that really heals things and cleans the house forever, is when you open your love and hold the darkness inside you, piece by piece, carefully, careful not to be overwhelmed. And of course this is done in special sessions. So that is how to be a yogi. And it contrasts completely with the way people in the fourth way talk, that they aren't going to be negative. They keep doing that for 30, 40 years and nothing changes, because they do not do the second part. Okay, well I think that's all I've got for today. God be with you.